Hello, my name is Lisa Black and I work at AFBI AHDB, and today we have the virtual variety visit for spring barley varieties. The plots you'll be seeing today are from the trial that was harvested in September this year, and this trial is part of the AHDB UK trialling system, and the data from this trial is collated with the UK-wide variety trial data across the UK to produce the recommended list. In November last month, the AHDB launched the new 21-22 recommended list, and so the data and status of the varieties that I'll be discussing today will be from this latest version. There are currently 17 varieties on the recommended list, 14 classed as malting varieties and 3 are feed, although all varieties can be grown as feed if they meet your requirements. There are 2 new candidates for 21-22. The first one is a feed variety, Cadiz, and the second is a malting Skyway. All the other varieties are fully recommended, although 6 of the fully recommended varieties were only new to the recommended list in 2020, and I'll highlight those as we meet them. For each variety, I'll be reviewing its strengths and weaknesses to help you make decisions on which varieties to select for your farm. If you've already purchased your seed, knowledge of the variety will help you in crop management decisions. Pepino is the first variety we're going to be looking at. It's a malting variety that was first listed in 2010. Its yields have dropped significantly compared with other newer varieties, and its treated yield currently stands at 95% of treated controls. Untreated is 82%. Its specific weight is good at 68.1 and compares favourably with a lot of the newer varieties on the recommended list. Its straw strength is good. It has a 7 for resistance to lodging, an 8 for resistance to brackling. However, its disease resistance could be better, a 6 for mildew, and below average for both brown rust and rincosporium at 5. Pepino will no longer be in recommended list trials going forward. The second variety we're looking at is RGT Planet. This is a malting variety that was first recommended in 2015. It is currently a control for the recommended list trials, and its treated yields are currently standing at 100% of treated controls in a treated situation and 91 untreated. Specific weight is reasonable at 67.8, so that's about 0.3 behind Pepino. Again, it has good strong straw, and it has a 9 for mildew, 5 for brown rust and 5 for rincosporium, so susceptible to rinco, below average there, but generally an all-round good variety, although its yields have declined in comparison to newer varieties. Next up is Sienna. Sienna is another malting variety that was first listed in 2015, and its treated yields are below that of RGT Planet, 98 treated compared to 100 for Planet treated and 90 untreated. It has the highest specific weight of all varieties in trial though, at 70.2, and in terms of straw strength it's reasonable resistance to both lodging and brackling. Its disease resistant profile is identical to that of Planet, a 9 for mildew and just under average at 5 for both brown rust and rincosporium. Sienna will no longer be in recommended list trials going forward. Next up is KWS Sassy. This is another malting variety, first listed in 2016 and is fully recommended for use across the UK. Treated yields are 98%, untreated 91%. Its specific weight sits at 68.4, so slightly higher than that of Pepino, and it has a similar disease resistance profile to the varieties that have gone before, a 9 for mildew, 5 for rinco and 6 for rincosporium. However, its resistance to lodging and brackling are 6, which is lower than other varieties on the list, and that's KWS Sassy. The next variety is Fairing. This is a malting variety that was also recommended in 2016, and it's a special recommendation because it can be used for malt for grain distilling. Treated yields are 93%, so pretty low in terms of yield for treated and untreated at 84. 68.2 for specific weight. Is a little earlier ripening, which is probably the only bonus it has for us here in Northern Ireland, and its disease resistance is variable. It has an 8 for mildew, a 4 for brown rust, and a 6 for Incosporium. Next up is Laureate. Laureate is another malting variety that was first recommended in 2016. It is one of the 4 controls in trial, and it is the first variety to break the 100% of treated controls barrier, 101 for treated and 93 untreated. In the West region, Laureate performs better still at 102% of treated controls. Its specific weight could be described as a little on the low side. It's 66.3 if you compare that to Sienna at 70.2. Straw strength is fine, a 7 for resistance to lodging, and 8 for brackling. In terms of disease resistance, again it has 9 for mildew, a 5 for brown rust, and a 6 for Incosporium. And in terms of ripening, it's a little later ripening than Concerto. Next up we have LG Diablo, and this is a malting variety that was first recommended in 2018. It also is a control variety for the trialling system, and you can see its treated yields are 102%, untreated yields of 94%, so good yields there for Diablo. Specific weight is at 66.9, so better than Laureate, but still 3 kilograms per hectolitre behind Sienna. Straw is fine, 7 for resistance to lodging and 8 for resistance to brackling. And its disease profile is very similar to all the varieties before it, 9 for mildew, 5 for brown rust, and a 5 for Incosporium. For ripening, however, it is +2, which puts it as one of the latest ripening varieties on the list, and that's LG Diablo. The next 6 varieties are varieties that were first listed in 2020, and these are Iconic, Fairway, Firefox, SY Tungsten, SY Splendor, and Prospect. In the new 21-22 recommended list, these are listed as generally recommended rather than provisionals, but relatively speaking, they are still quite new to the recommended list, and so we'll discuss them in full detail. First of those 6 varieties is Iconic, and as I said, this was first listed in 2020 and is a malting variety with a recommendation for the West region. And as you can see, for the whole of the UK, treated yields are 99% of treated controls, but in the West region, we get yields of 101% of the treated controls, so it performs very well in the West. Untreated yields of 93% of controls shows that Iconic is a relatively low-risk variety. In terms of specific weight, it's 67.1, so just about 0.7 kilograms per hectolitre behind Planet. And for straw, it has a 7 for resistance to lodging and an 8 for resistance to brackling. In terms of ripening, it's one of the earliest in terms of those currently on the recommended list. So, for example, Diablo and SY Splendor would be the later ripening on the list, and Iconic here is one of the earlier ripening on the list. For disease resistance, it's got a 9 for mildew, slightly below average for brown rust at 5, and based on limited information, it is a 6, which is average for Incosporium. Next up is Fairway, and this is the second of the 6 varieties that were first listed in 2020. And this is the first feed variety on the list that we've discussed so far. Treated yields are 103% of treated controls, untreated 91%. So you can see in terms of yield, treated yields especially, it's a step up compared to the varieties we've already viewed. Specific weight, however, is on the low side at 65.6. In fact, Fairway has the lowest specific weight of all varieties on the current list. Straw strength is fine with a 7 for resistance to lodging and an 8 for resistance to brackling. In terms of disease resistance, it has the 9 for mildew, has no rating for brown rust, but has a 3 for Incosporium. So Fairway is susceptible to Incosporium, and now growing conditions potentially has to be managed carefully because of that. Next up is Firefox with 2 X's, and this is the third of the 6 varieties that were recommended in 2020. It is listed as a malting variety, but as you can see, it has very good yields, 103 treated and 92 untreated. Its specific weight is better than that of Fairway, but still a bit on the low side at 66.4. In terms of straw, 7 for lodging and an 8 for resistance to brackling. It has a +1 compared to Concerto for ripening, so ripens a bit later than the likes of Planet, Iconic and Fairway, but not as late as Diablo and Splendor, which we'll be talking about shortly. Disease resistance, mildew is a 9. It's 4 for brown rust and below average at 5 for Ringosporium. So there is Firefox. Next up we have SY Tungsten, and this is the 4th of the 6 varieties that were first listed in 2020. Again, it's a malting variety, and you can see its yields are very similar to the 2 varieties that have gone before, Firefox and Fairway, 103 treated and 91 untreated. Its specific weight, however, is much better than that of Firefox and Fairway at 67.4. Straw strength is fine, a 7 for lodging and 8 for resistance to brackling. In terms of disease resistance, a 9 for mildew, but 4 for both brown rust and Ringosporium, so relatively susceptible to both those diseases. And in terms of ripening, it's a +1, same as Firefox, so not as early as Iconic or Fairway. Next up is SY Splendor. This variety was first listed in 2020 as an malting variety. As you can see, very similar yields to the 3 previous varieties before, 103 treated, 91 untreated. Has a good specific weight, Splendor, at 67.9, so nearly 68. And in terms of straw strength, it has a 7 for lodging, resistance to lodging, and an 8 for resistance to brackling. Disease resistance could be better though, although it has a 9 for mildew, it's got a 3 for brown rust and a 4 for Ringosporium. And in addition to that, Splendor is quite late ripening. It is the only one alongside LG Diablo that has +2 for ripening compared to Concerto. Prospect is the 6th variety that was first listed in 2020 and is a feed variety. As you can see, its yields are very good, 102% of treated controls and 94 in untreated trials, so a very low yield penalty for disease there, only 8%. Its specific weight is reasonable, on a par with Splendor. Prospect is 67.7, Splendor 67.9. It has a 7 for resistance to lodging and is the only variety on the list that actually has a 9 for resistance to brackling, so that might be of interest to growers. In terms of disease resistance, it's actually relatively good compared to the other varieties on the list. It has a 5 for brown rust and a 6 for Ringosporium. There's no varieties currently on the list that have higher than a 6, but 6 is average, so Prospect there, potentially a good variety for Northern Ireland. In terms of ripening, it's +1, so not as late as Splendor or Diablo, but not as early as Planet or Iconic or Fairway. Next up is Cadiz, and this is the first of 2 new varieties for the 21-22 recommended list. It's a feed variety, and its scope of recommendation is for the east and west regions. Northern Ireland is in the west region, and you can see that it gives 103% of treated controls and 94 of untreated. So very similar yields to the few varieties that have gone before. In terms of specific weight, it's reasonable at 67.4. Straw strength is okay. It has a 7 for resistance to lodging and an 8 for resistance to brackling. In terms of disease resistance, we have quite limited information on it. It has a 9 for mildew, but we don't have any information on its resistance to Ringosporium and brown rust. Presumably that will come with time and trial. So that is Cadiz, which is the its first year recommendation in the AHDB recommended list. The last variety we're going to be talking about is Skyway, although we don't have video footage of this variety because when we did the filming, this was a candidate with no information, but as you can see, it has been recommended for the 21-22 recommended list. And this is a variety that is for malting, but has huge potential as well for feed in that it has the highest yield of all varieties in trial. 106 treated as a UK average, and in the West, its treated yields are 108. Untreated yields are 96, so high untreated yields, which means it has a low yield penalty for disease and potentially is a low risk variety. Specific weight is good at 68.7, so just below 69, so no issues with its specific weight. It has a 7 for resistance to lodging and an 8 for resistance to brackling. In terms of ripening, it's a +1, so it's on a par with Cadiz and Prospect and Tungsten and Firefox, but not as early ripening as Iconic, Fairway and Planet. Disease resistance, like Cadiz, we have very limited information on this. It's a 9 for mildew, but there's no information on its resistance to brown rust or Rhynchosporium. So again, if you're growing this or Cadiz, you would need to make sure you have proper management in terms of disease control. So that is the last of the varieties we're going to be looking at, and I'll be doing a quick summary in the next slide. So just to summarise, I'm actually using the new AHDB Spring Barley 2021 recommended list, which is hot off the press. It was launched last month. And you can see Skyway and Cadiz are both highlighted as new recommendations. Both have exceptionally high yields in the West region. You can see Skyway has 108, whereas Cadiz has 106. Untreated yields are good for both. Skyway is 96, Cadiz is 94. And in terms of ripening, they're both similar, 1 day later than Costello. Both have good straw strength and both have a 9 for mildew. Now, we don't have information on brown rust or Rhynchosporium for these two, but with good untreated yields, chances are they have a very good disease-resistant profile generally. Specific weight-wise, they're both reasonably good. Skyway would have the superior specific weight at 68.7. Cadiz is 67. Of the 6 varieties were recommended in 2020, that is Splendor, Tungsten, Firefox, Iconic, Fairway and Prospect. Just want to point out a few maybe points of concern. Splendor has a +2 for ripening, so quite late there, otherwise a good variety. And also Fairway has a specific weight of 65.6, which is quite low, so potentially steer clear of that. Looking across to Cosmopolitan, Diablo and Laureate, you can see that Diablo has a +2 for ripening, so again potentially late ripening and might be one to avoid for those reasons. Planet, which is very popular here in Northern Ireland, is still doing well. It's 100% treated, which is granted 8% behind Skyway in terms of treated yield. But, you know, it's a consistent performer, and I think if it's performed well with you, it still has a place in the on farm. And 67.8 specific weight is relatively good too. The older varieties like Sassy, Prepino, and Fairing, probably a bit outdated in terms of the yield. I know a lot of people are very fond of Prepino because of specific weight, but you know, if you look at Skyway, that's 68.7 compared to 68.1 for Prepino, still performing well. The bonus for the likes of Prepino, Iconic and Planet are that they are the earliest ripening varieties on the recommended list, along with Fairway, although Fairway with that low specific weight maybe isn't ideal. So basically, I think the 2 new varieties, Skyway and Cadiz, are worth looking at. I also think Planet has a place still, and it might be worth looking at some of those ones that were recommended in 2020. Potentially SY Tungsten, which doesn't have low specific weight and isn't later ripening. Okay, that's it for the varieties for 2021. Thank you very much for your time, and if any questions, I'm sure Robin Bolton will make sure they get to me and I can answer them that way. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay folks, thank you for watching this virtual tour of the spring barley plots here at Crossnacreevy. This will be the last in the series for this year, for 2020. Once again, we'd like to thank AFBI for hosting us here across Macleavy, and also to the AHDB for their continued support of the trials programme within Northern Ireland. I'll take this opportunity again just to remind you again of the online facilities which are on the AHDB website, the variety selection tool, and also the downloadable recommended list app, which means you can take the recommended list with you wherever you go. We hope you've enjoyed this series of videos. If you have any queries about varieties or any of the crops not covered in the videos, then please contact us at CAFRE or contact Lisa at Black at AFBI, and we can find out more information for you on those particular varieties. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you again next year.